How does a stranger change a man's life in a single winter morning? The question hangs like the pale breath over Frontier Creek, carried on the cold wind of the New Year's dawn. Snow has laid a quiet shroud across the land, and the sky is a flat, unbroken gray. Daniel Carter stands at the small wooden platform where the morning train shrieks into the stillness. He is 33, a widower, a rancher, a man who has learned to bury feeling beneath duty. His children are home, asleep in a house that has grown silent since Laura died. Today, he expects a woman named Eleanor Brooks. Older, reliable, safe. Someone who will bring order, not emotion. But when the passengers step down, there is no Eleanor. Instead, a young woman hesitates at the platform's edge. Her suitcase is worn, her boots dusty from miles of travel. Her name is Lillian Hayes. She looks barely 23, with eyes that try to be brave, even as the winter bites at her cheeks. She tells Daniel that Eleanor fell ill. The agency sent her. Her voice is steady, but it carries the thin tremor of someone who has been turned away too often. Daniel feels a slow tightening in his chest. This is not what he asked for. This is not what he wants. The town watches. Frontier Creek is small. Whispers move faster than the wind, and Daniel knows exactly what they are thinking. A young woman in a widower's house? Not proper, not safe. But propriety is only one fear. The deeper one lives inside him. He cannot risk his children's fragile hearts, nor his own. So his tone is curt when he tells her he will put her back on the next train. He keeps his face hard, because that is easier than kindness. Lillian nods, swallowing disappointment with the quiet dignity of someone used to rejection. She has nowhere to return to, but she refuses to beg, until fate intervenes in the simplest way. Emily Carter, Daniel's 4-year-old daughter, has slipped on frozen ground. Her knee is scraped, her eyes wide and wet. Before Daniel can move, Lillian kneels in the snow, ungloving her hands despite the cold. Her touch is gentle. Her words are soft. She ties a strip from her own handkerchief and hums while Emily steadies her breath. Jacob Carter, 6 years old, stands nearby and watches with wary curiosity. Daniel watches too. Something loosens inside him, a wall cracking under the quiet insistence of kindness. So when Lillian asks for a 30-day trial, no wages, only room and board, he agrees with reluctance disguised as practicality. She steps into the Carter home on that New Year's morning, into a house that has forgotten the sound of laughter. The rooms carry the scent of smoke and old sorrow. Laura's memory lingers in every corner, yet the warmth she once embodied has dimmed into silence. Lillian begins not with grand gestures, but with small, steadfast acts. She cleans the kitchen stove. She braids Emily's hair. She helps Jacob with letters he pretends to dislike but secretly wants to master. Daniel keeps his distance. He watches from doorways and shadows, refusing to trust the light she brings. But even he cannot ignore the way the atmosphere shifts. There are meals eaten together again. There are stories told softly before bed. There is the faint sound of humming in the hallway where silence used to echo. Lillian works tirelessly, yet it is not effort that changes the house. It is presence. It is the way she listens, the way she bends to the level of a frightened child without pity or judgment. Still, beneath her calm surface, there are dark secrets. She has come from places where power meant danger, where men twisted truth into weapons. A former employer accused her of theft after she refused advances. Reputation shattered, she fled west to survive. None of this is spoken yet. Only suggested in the guarded way she glances over her shoulder, or the way she freezes at unexpected footsteps. Love that crosses boundaries. A woman fighting for freedom. A past that stalks her like winter shadows. Daniel senses pieces of truth without asking for the whole. He respects silence. His own grief has carved deep lines across his life, and he guards those wounds just as carefully. He is used to control, counting cattle, measuring weather, managing risk. but the heart is not a ledger. And slowly, quietly, this stranger at New Year's dawn becomes a presence he cannot file away or dismiss. The children feel it first. Jacob begins to joke again. Emily reaches for Lillian's hand without fear, and Daniel, for the first time in months, hears laughter echo through his home. He does not smile easily, but sometimes, when no one is looking, the corners of his mouth soften. The house begins to breathe again. The land seems less empty. Even the winter sun feels warmer on the snow. Yet suspicion remains. His, the town's, the world's. Lillian knows she is being tested, watched, measured, as if one wrong step will erase every kindness. She works with a quiet determination that hides exhaustion. At night, she sits near the window, staring out at the white horizon, wondering whether she belongs anywhere at all. Daniel sees her once in that posture, a small, solitary figure against a world too big, and something twists inside his chest. He wants to protect her, but wanting means risk, and risk is the thing he fears most. So the first days of the new year pass beneath the vast western sky. The house at the Carter Ranch is no longer silent, but its warmth is fragile, like fire in a storm. Every small moment matters. Every glance, every unspoken word builds a thread between them. And somewhere in the quiet hours between dusk and dawn, the stranger becomes more than an arrival. She becomes a possibility. The question returns, lingering like distant thunder over the plains. How does a stranger change a man's life? The answer lies not in dramatic gestures, but in the steady, aching return of hope. The most dangerous feeling of all. The 30 days begin without ceremony, counted not by a clock on the wall, but by the careful rhythm of life returning to the Carter Ranch. Morning frost glitters on the fence rails. Smoke curls lazily from the chimney, and each new sunrise brings Lillian deeper into the fragile orbit of the family. She rises before the children, tends the fire, and moves through the house with a quiet steadiness that asks for nothing yet offers everything. Jacob notices first. He pretends indifference, the way boys do when they fear yearning too much. But he lingers near the kitchen table, waiting for Lillian's gentle nod before opening his book. She does not scold when he stumbles over words. She waits, patient, until confidence meets sound. Emily clings more openly. She tugs on Lillian's sleeve, asks for braids, for songs, for stories whispered before sleep. And Lillian gives, though the giving costs her something unseen, something woven into the scars of her past. Daniel watches all of it with a careful distance. He tells himself this is temporary. 30 days, a contract, a practical solution. But practicality has a way of softening when laughter begins to live again inside walls that once echoed with grief. Meals are taken together now. Jacob talks about the ranch, about the horses, about the way winter light bends across the open plains. Emily giggles at the creak of Daniel's boots, at his quiet cough when he doesn't know how to handle affection. And Lillian sits across from him, eyes lowered, never taking more space than she believes she deserves. Yet somehow her presence fills every corner. Still, beneath the warmth lies tension. Daniel guards himself with a discipline sharpened by loss. He notices the careful way Lillian avoids closed doors, the way certain sounds make her shoulders stiffen. Dark secrets live in the hesitations she hides behind small smiles. And though he never asks, he wonders. Meanwhile, the town watches. Frontier Creek thrives on silence broken by rumor. A widow's home with a young woman inside is enough to spark fires of speculation. Daniel hears it at the feed store, in the angles of glances, in the pause before conversation. He shields Lillian from the worst of it, but he cannot shield himself from the tightening in his chest every time someone questions her character, or his judgment. Yet each evening, when the world grows quiet and the wind hums low against the eaves, the fragile hope inside the house expands. One night, Jacob asks whether they may decorate the mantel for the New Year's season. even though the holiday has already passed. Lillian agrees. They gather evergreen branches and twine them into garlands. Emily carefully places a small ribbon at the center. Daniel stands apart, watching, unsure how to enter a world that no longer revolves around grief. But when Emily calls his name, he joins them, awkward at first, then easier, as if memory has guided his hands back to gentler work. Through these days, Lillian continues to fight for her own quiet freedom. She carries herself with dignity, even when doubt creeps in. She knows what people whisper. She knows the cost of trust. And yet she trusts the children. She trusts the small rituals they build together. A cup of cocoa shared on the back steps. A moment of silence as the sky turns copper at dusk. A single word from Daniel, spoken softly instead of sharply. These are seeds of something that neither of them dares name. Daniel finds himself drawn into conversation he never meant to begin. He asks about Lillian's travel west, about what she hopes for. She gives careful answers, never lingering too long on the pain that follows her like a shadow. But when she speaks of wanting to belong somewhere, his heart stirs. He too longs for belonging, though he would never say it aloud. Nights grow colder, yet inside the house, warmth grows. Emily falls asleep against Lillian's shoulder. Jacob brings her small treasures from the ranch. Daniel begins to look forward to evenings more than mornings, because evenings mean he is not alone. But hope, especially newfound hope, is delicate. It trembles at the slightest disturbance. One afternoon, an old acquaintance of Laura's stops by. She notices Lillian at the stove and raises an eyebrow that says more than words. Daniel feels anger flash through him, sharp and protective. Lillian only lowers her gaze, swallowing the ache that such moments bring. That night, she sits awake longer than usual, staring out at the vast white fields, wondering whether she is a blessing or a burden. Daniel steps into the room, pauses, then sits nearby without speaking. The silence becomes a fragile understanding between them. They are both haunted, and yet here they are, choosing to remain. Slowly, something changes. Not sudden, not dramatic. Just the quiet realization that Lillian is no longer a stranger passing through. She has become woven into the daily life of the ranch, into the rhythm of chores, into the laughter of children, into the space at the table where Daniel's gaze settles when he thinks no one notices. The 30 days pass like breath on winter glass, visible for a moment, then gone. But what remains is not the contract, not the trial, not the terms they began with. What remains is connection. Unspoken, dangerous, beautiful. The kind of bond that asks for courage. And courage is what both of them fear most. Still, the heart does not wait for permission. It only waits for a reason. And here, beneath the wide Wyoming sky, a reason has quietly taken root. The storm does not begin with thunder. It begins with a knock on the door. A simple sound, sharp against the quiet rhythm the household has learned to trust. The sky is the color of pewter, the wind restless, and there is a weight in the air that no one can quite name until Daniel opens the door and finds a stranger framed in cold light. His name is Richard Alden. He carries himself like a man who believes papers matter more than people, and the leather case in his hand feels heavier than the snow clouds overhead. He introduces himself with clipped politeness, stating he represents the agency that placed Lillian. Daniel invites him in out of courtesy, but from the first step across the threshold, the warmth of the house recedes into something brittle. Lillian freezes when she sees him. Her hands tremble only once before she stills them at her sides. She knows that case. She knows what it contains. Secrets never die easily, and hers have tracked her across miles of wilderness and miles of silence. Richard asks to speak in private, but nothing in this house is private anymore. The walls hold everything. So they stand by the table as he opens the case and removes a thin stack of documents, official, stamped, cold. He clears his throat and speaks of allegations, of theft, of impropriety. of accusations made by her previous employer. His tone is neutral, professional, yet every word cuts deeper than judgment ever should. Lillian listens without interrupting. She stands very straight, her face pale, eyes fixed on a knot in the wooden floor, as if by anchoring herself to something solid she might survive the blow. She denies what he says, not with drama, not with pleading, but with a quiet dignity that almost hurts to hear. She explains the truth she once explained to deaf ears, that she was not a thief, but a woman who refused a man's unwanted hands. That revenge arrived wrapped in paperwork and false testimony, but truth spoken twice does not become louder. It simply echoes. Daniel feels the old fear rise inside him like winter floodwater. He hears Richard, hears Lillian, hears the whisper of every person in Frontier Creek who ever doubted. He remembers the children's fragile hearts. He remembers Laura's death and the hollow afterward. He thinks of risk, of trust, of what happens when love is betrayed. And inside him, hope begins to shake. The town reacts quickly. Rumor travels on horseback, faster than any train. Eyes linger longer. Conversations stop when Daniel walks past. Sympathy mixes with suspicion, and the line between the two becomes thin as ice. Jacob senses the tension, even if he does not understand its shape. Emily clings closer to Lillian, as if love alone can hold back a gathering storm. And Lillian, trapped between history and survival, tries to continue her work as if nothing has changed, but her silence grows heavier. At night, Daniel lies awake. His thoughts circle endlessly. He wants to believe her. He does believe her, or he thinks he does, until fear whispers that belief is dangerous, that he has children to protect, that love clouds judgment. Grief has carved uncertainty into his bones, and he does not yet know how to live without it. When Richard returns the next day, his voice is firmer. The agency will need to reassess her placement. He advises Daniel to end the arrangement. It is safer, he says, cleaner, responsible. The word rings in Daniel's ears like a sentence. He sends the children outside. He faces Lillian across the worn kitchen table where so many soft evenings once sat. His voice is controlled, but inside he is falling apart. He asks for honesty. She gives it. Every detail, every wound, every memory she would rather bury. She tells him she has fought for freedom her entire life, that survival has never been easy, that this ranch has been the first place she has felt safe in years. Her eyes fill but do not spill. She will not beg. She has begged before, and it broke nothing but her own heart. Daniel looks at her and sees the woman who healed his children, who brought warmth back into a house of ghosts. But he also sees risk, scandal, loss, and in a moment that will soon haunt him more deeply than anything else, fear wins. He tells her she must leave. His voice cracks at the edges. He cannot meet her eyes when he says it. The room goes still. The house that had begun to breathe once more exhales a single, shattering silence. Lillian nods. Not because she agrees, not because she accepts the lie that paperwork defines truth, but because she understands what fear does to the human heart. She gathers what little she owns in the quiet hours after sunset. She writes a letter to Jacob and Emily, her words trembling across the page, promising that none of this is their fault, that love does not end simply because distance begins. She lays the letters where small hands will find them. Then she steps out into the winter night with a suitcase and a heart that refuses to harden. Even now, the children find out in the morning. Emily's sobs crack through the house like breaking ice. Jacob is silent, which is worse. He looks at his father not with anger at first, but with disbelief. Then the anger comes. He asks why. He asks if goodness means nothing. And Daniel, who once believed himself strong, realizes he has never felt weaker. The ranch grows quiet again. The laughter fades. Everything Lillian planted remains. Habits, small comforts. But without her, they become ghosts. Daniel walks through rooms that still hold her presence like fading light. He knows he has done what fear demanded. But for the first time, he wonders whether safety and rightness are always the same thing. And that question will not leave him, no matter how hard he tries to bury it beneath responsibility. Outside, winter deepens. Inside, hope collapses beneath the weight of suspicion and regret. The storm of accusations has passed through the house, leaving ruin in its wake. And Daniel, alone with the echo of his own choices, must now decide whether the life he is protecting is worth the love he has driven away. The house does not fall silent all at once. It fades into stillness the way a fire shrinks to embers, slowly, painfully, leaving the scent of something that once warmed the air. After Lillian leaves, the Carter Ranch becomes a place of echoing footsteps and unfinished sentences. Emily calls for her in the night. Jacob grows quiet, anger tucked beneath a boy's attempts at bravery. Daniel moves through the rooms like a stranger inside his own life, haunted by the sound of the door closing behind the only person who had managed to stitch the edges of his family back together. He tells himself he acted out of duty, out of caution, out of love for his children. But the truth stalks him through every hour. Duty does not ache this way. Caution does not hollow a man out. Only regret does. The letter arrives the next morning, folded, neat, formal only in appearance, not in heart. A friend from town slips it into Daniel's hand with a sober expression. It is from a former rancher back east, a man who once worked under the same employer who accused Lillian. The man writes that the accusations were lies, vengeful and cruel, spoken after Lillian refused to be used. He apologizes that the truth comes too late. Daniel reads the letter once, then again, the words burning into him until he can barely breathe. He thinks of Lillian's steady voice, her refusal to beg, the way she carried her pain alone. And he realizes he did not protect his children from heartbreak. He handed heartbreak to them himself. He finds Jacob in the barn. The boy is brushing down a gelding with stiff, angry strokes. Daniel tries to speak, but the words tangle into silence. Jacob lifts his eyes and looks straight through him, as if the safe place his father once represented has disappeared. That look hurts more than any storm. Emily clings to Daniel's leg later that afternoon and asks whether Mama Lillian will come home. And Daniel hears the way the word Mama trembles. Something inside him breaks cleanly in two. He does not wait for sunrise. Snow begins to fall again as he saddles his horse. The winter wind claws at his coat, but the cold means nothing now. What frightens him is not the storm. It is the distance, the miles between remorse and forgiveness. Lillian is on the road to town, waiting for the next eastbound train. If he does not reach her, the chance to mend what he destroyed will vanish into the endless stretch of rails and sky. He rides. The land is a sheet of white, the horizon swallowed in a gray blur. Hooves drum against frozen earth. Frost burns his lungs. Snow lashes at his face, stinging like truth. The farther he goes, the louder the storm grows, as if the world itself wants to test whether he truly means to change. Daniel grips the reins tighter, pushing forward with the desperation of a man who has finally learned that safety without love is nothing but an empty room. Memories strike with every mile. The first evening Lillian read to the children. The way Jacob pretended not to listen but leaned closer with each paragraph. The hum in Lillian's throat when Emily fell asleep on her shoulder. The hesitant laughter that returned to the house. The quiet strength beneath her fears. And above all, the look in her eyes when he told her to leave. A look not of blame, but of weary understanding. She had seen fear like his before. She knew what it could do. The train whistle carries faintly across the wind long before Daniel reaches town. Panic surges through him. He digs his heels in. The horse surges forward. The streets of Frontier Creek blur past him. The saloon lights, the general store. The shapes of startled bystanders stepping aside as he tears toward the station. He sees her on the platform, a small figure against the enormous sky. Suitcase at her feet, shoulders squared, as if bracing herself for another life that may be no kinder than the last. Richard Alden stands nearby, posture stiff, gaze unreadable. Steam coils from the locomotive, wrapping the air in ghostly spirals. Every second counts. Every breath matters. Daniel dismounts before the horse fully stops. He stumbles across the platform, calling her name. She turns. There is hurt in her eyes, and restraint, and strength. For a moment, neither of them speaks. The world narrows to the space between them and the sound of the train breathing against the rails. Daniel presses the crumpled letter into her trembling hand. He tells her everything, the proof of her innocence, the shame that has chased him from the moment she walked away, the realization that fear has ruled his life for too long. His voice cracks as he admits the truth. He believes her. He always did. But he let grief choose for him. He let the past decide the future. And in doing so, he risked losing the only woman who ever brought life back into his children's eyes. Lillian listens. Snow gathers in her hair like fragments of winter stars. The pain does not disappear simply because truth arrives at last. Wounds need time. But beneath the weariness lives a heart that still wants to trust, still longs for belonging, still loves him despite everything. She asks him for honesty. She asks him for courage. She asks whether he is willing to choose love, not merely when it is safe, but when it demands vulnerability. Daniel does not hesitate now. Right there on the platform, with the storm swirling around them and the town as witness, he sinks to one knee. Not with flourish, not with grand romance, but with raw sincerity. He asks her to come home, to marry him, to build something new out of the ashes of everything they have lost. He promises not that life will be easy, but that he will never again allow fear to decide for him. For a heartbeat, the world holds still. Then Lillian exhales a breath she has been holding for years. She says yes. Richard Alden clears his throat and quietly acknowledges the agency's mistake. Evidence will clear her record. Her name will be restored. But titles and papers mean little now. What matters is the way Jacob and Emily will run into her arms. What matters is the way Daniel finally stands without the weight of regret pressing into his shoulders. The train departs without her. Daniel leads her to the horse waiting outside the station. He helps her mount, and together they ride back through the winter fields. The storm is calmer now. The sky opens just enough to reveal a pale ribbon of silver. And though the path ahead remains uncertain, they ride into it side by side, no longer strangers, no longer separated by silence or fear. Only two people choosing love in a world that rarely makes such choices easy. The wedding happens quietly, without banners or brass or spectacle, as if love itself has chosen to speak in a softer voice beneath the winter skies. Time has already reshaped the Carter Ranch. The house that once carried silence now carries the sound of small feet, of laughter echoing up stairways, of chairs scraping against the floor when the children race toward the door to see whether Lillian has returned from the yard. She moves through the rooms not as a visitor anymore, but as someone whose name belongs with the others. The neighbors come, not out of curiosity this time, but out of a still, respectful warmth. Forgiveness is a powerful thing in a small town. It changes the way people look at you. It rewrites the story they once thought they knew. Richard Alden has already sent word that her record has been cleared. The truth has taken root at last. Though the journey to reach it has left its marks, Daniel and Lillian carry those marks with quiet dignity, letting them become part of the life they are building, not shadows over it. The ceremony is held beneath the great birch tree near the frozen stream, the place where Laura once stood and pledged her life to Daniel. Lillian understands the weight of that memory, and she honors it, not by erasing it, but by stepping gently beside it. The breeze whispers through the bare branches. Snow dusts the ground in a thin silver veil. A pale sun sits low on the horizon, as if reluctant to disturb the moment. Jacob and Emily stand close, each clutching a small bouquet of winter greenery tied with ribbon. Their faces glow with the open joy children possess when they know, finally, that the world is safe again. Daniel stands straighter than he has in years, not because grief has disappeared, but because he has learned how to carry it without letting it rule him. Pastor Samuel Morgan speaks simply about choosing one another every day, even when the road is long and the sky uncertain. He does not linger on poetry. He does not raise his voice. He speaks like a man who knows that marriage is not a performance, but a daily promise whispered in kitchens and barns and quiet rooms after the children sleep. When Daniel takes Lillian's hands, the world seems to hold its breath. The scars of fear and doubt have not vanished. They simply no longer lead the way. He vows to live with courage now, to protect his children without closing the door to tenderness, to stand beside Lillian not as a rescuer or a guardian, but as an equal partner in all the seasons to come. Lillian's voice is low but unwavering when she promises honesty and trust, the two things she once believed the world would never allow her. She will not hide from the past, nor will she let it dictate who she becomes. She looks at Jacob and Emily with a warmth that fills the space between them like sunlight, promising that their hearts will never again be left without shelter. There is applause when the vows end, soft, heartfelt. Emily slips her small hand into Lillian's and whispers, "Mama," with a shy smile that speaks more than any speech could. Jacob tries to look solemn, grown up, but his happiness betrays him in the quick sparkle of his eyes. Daniel bends down and wraps both children into an embrace that now belongs to all four of them. The town lingers for a simple meal afterward. Bread, stew, coffee. No one needs more than that. Laughter floats across the yard, and for the first time since Laura died, Daniel allows himself to feel gratitude without guilt. He has learned that love is not a limited well. It grows when shared. It makes room. Later, as the last guests depart and twilight pours gently across the land, Daniel and Lillian stand on the porch together. The sky above Frontier Creek shifts into shades of lavender and silver. Snowflakes drift lazily, as if the world is exhaling. The ranch stretches quiet and wide before them, a place that will forever carry the ghosts of sorrow and the footsteps of healing. They speak little. They do not need to. Everything has already been said in the way their hands fit together, in the steady rhythm of breath that now aligns between them. Inside, the children prepare for sleep, whispering about the future in the innocent tones of those who finally believe tomorrow will be kind. Love that crosses boundaries has found a home here. A woman who once fled from cruelty has chosen a life built on trust. A man once paralyzed by grief has learned to risk his heart again. And in the great silence of the western night, beneath endless stars and the pale hush of winter, their story settles into the land like a promise. The promise that second chances do not erase what came before, but transform it into something stronger, something that can weather storms and stand steady when the wind howls across the plains. Their life together begins not with explosions of joy, but with the steady, unshakable knowledge that they are no longer alone. And sometimes, especially in the Wild West where hardship is constant and the horizon is always moving, that is the greatest miracle of all. Word count, 935. The story closes gently here, beneath soft winter skies. Daniel, Lillian, Jacob, and Emily step into a future that carries both the memory of loss and the warmth of new beginnings. Their love grows not out of perfection, but out of resilience. Out of the courage to trust even when trust once brought pain. The past remains a quiet companion, but no longer a shadow. Together they build a home grounded in kindness, forgiveness, and the daily choice to stay. Snow drifts in slow circles beyond the windows, and the land lies calm, wrapped in silver light. In that hush, the family breathes easily, held together by something tender and true. And as night settles fully across Frontier Creek, their story rests, not finished but safely continuing, guided by the steady glow of hope. End of article. Good night.